minutes. I promise I'll be really short and sweet. Believe it or not, this is about my commitment to faith-based government. And what I did this morning was just, I guess, restore my own faith. I came here a little bit despondent. You know, these are themes that we're hearing about faith and despondence. And I restored some faith. And how I did that was, I guess, in a very modern kind of way. I looked at my email for the last week while I've been away. And I came up with lots of reasons why I now have some restored faith. And I'm going to share those with you in a different kind of format, which is I'm just going to circulate to you some pieces of email that I've highlighted in a couple of places for you to take a look at that might give you some faith about that there is a lot going on. These all relate to responding to climate change issues, and they're all about government action and local action by different sectors and different parts of the responders. This first one is a press release that came out of New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation by a guy I know named Franz Litz, and it was the dated August 15th. States reached agreement on proposed rules for the nation's first cap-and-trade program to address climate change. So I'm going to hand these around. This is one that came to me through a climate educator in the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, but really is transmitting to a group of us who do environmental education outreach work among the state environmental agencies in New England. But it's basically a national effort. And it's called, it's forwarded to the Northeast educators and students concerning global warming. And it's about a new initiative by a professor, Eben Goodstein, who you probably know out in Oregon, as well as a professor at Middlebury. And it's the development of a workshop that will lead to something called the Focus the Nation program. It's going to be launched in Middlebury. And it's an educational initiative to help the American public to collaboratively discuss and act upon the theme of stabilizing the climate in the 21st century. I'll pass that along. This is a guy I know who runs an association of community colleges and voc schools around the country, who I used to know some years ago in the sort of water business, if you will, among the regulatory folks. This is announcing a workshop for educators and trainers at the vocational education level and community college level, announcing a gathering for 3 days in November at Hudson Valley Community College in Troy, New York, an opportunity for educational providers and faculty, that is high schools, community colleges, and other programs, to learn about the best practices and effective approaches to teaching workforce skills, and I emphasize that, in the energy efficiency and renewable energy trade and industries. So this is anticipating the infusion of a lot more renewables and clean energy in our nation, and training the people who are going to service those things and install them and repair them when that comes to happen. Here's another one, August 22nd, a focus group convening in Keene, New Hampshire, that is developing a new national program of Climate Safe Communities campaign, which is going to be a sort of a jumping off from what you may have heard of, the Cities for Climate Protection Program, through an organization called ICLEI, which is an international program that basically draws together communities around the world around the issue of climate change. So this is a kickoff event happening in Keene, New Hampshire the day after I get back that I will go to. Here's the next one. This is from the Portsmouth Herald Health News. The title of it is University of New Hampshire Research Center offers climate podcasts. This is dated August 14th, in a description about a new podcast that's starting up. So this is all very utilizing sort of new technologies and modes of communication. Here's a little article from the Portland, Maine Press Herald Writer, and it describes a tiny little advertising public relations firm in Portland, Maine, that is basically decided that it's going to try to zero out its carbon footprint over time, but it's going to be doing that through underwriting wind and methane energy projects. and it's going to involve selling carbon credits for a wind turbine project led by a Sioux tribe in South Dakota. So you can read a little bit about that. But this is a newspaper that's read all over the state of Maine. Here's an announcement of some grants that have been just given by the EPA office in Washington that now does the climate work. It's now called Clean Energy / Climate Partnership Program. But this is a listing of some of the recipients of state clean energy initiatives. And it's kind of an interesting mix nationally of grantees for this particular wave of EPA grants, which incidentally are really drying up quickly. Here's a little press release out of San Francisco talking about the Green E Renewable Energy Certification Program that some of you may be familiar with, but it's the Consumers Energy Green Generation Renewable Energy Certificates that are now Green E certified in the state of Michigan, so that someone who buys their electric power from, in this particular part of Michigan, can purchase green energy and get credits for it. This is kind of just basically a procedural, not particularly substantive email from the executive director of the Atlantic Provinces Community College Consortium in Newfoundland that I've been communicating with, and he's pulling together representatives of the community colleges in Eastern Canada that are specifically interested in doing greenhouse gas reduction projects. So I'm doing this in collaboration with them because a lot of the colleges in the Northeast have got to jump on, if you will, the Canadian side of the border. And I'm bringing up the sustainability coordinator from Yale who will address this august group, as well as a professor from Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Bill Mumma, who's a major contributor to the IPCC over many years and represented the Netherlands during the Kyoto negotiations. So, we're spreading the word across the border here too. Here's an announcement called Strategies for Institutionalizing Sustainability in Higher Education. Third annual conference of the Northeast Campus Sustainability Consortium, happening at the beginning of November, committed to the UN Decade of Education for Sustainable Development. This is going to be at Yale. The president of Yale is going to speak to this group, and the dean of the forestry school, Gus Spaeth, is going to speak too. This is an organization that I helped create of Northeast campuses and universities that have professional, on-board campus sustainability people. It's open to the whole college and university community across the Northeast. Again, these are ways that I get hope in my life. Here's one from August 11th. Governor Romney, a press release, on Friday unveiled a plan to both reduce demand and increase supply for the state of Massachusetts. It will require more efficient energy use in state buildings, increased use of biofuels in the state, and the automobile fleet, in creation of a lottery in which prizes will be awarded to consumers who buy energy-efficient equipment. It'll also include RFPs for wind and biomass power generation facilities at state buildings on and off state lands. I'm getting down near the bottom here, but this is pretty good for 1 week. Separate announcements. This is a Seattle Post-Intelligencer press release that was sent to me. In separate announcements, researchers at the University of Johannesburg and a private company in Palo Alto have announced a major breakthrough in reducing the cost of solar electric cells. The trade journals are abuzz with the news. This will reduce solar cell production costs by a factor of 4 to 5. That could bring the cost to below that of delivered electricity in a large fraction of the world. The California team is backed by a powerful team of private investors, including Google's 2 founders and the Swiss insurance giant, Swiss Re, basically. Here's an interesting one. Dateline Paris with the Christian Science Monitor. The title is Nuclear Power's Green Promise, Dulled by Rising Temperatures. The extended heat wave in July aggravated drought conditions across much of Europe, lowering water levels in the lakes and rivers that many nuclear plants depend on to cool their reactors. The result is that utility companies in France, Spain, and Germany where we're forced to take some plants offline and reduce operations at others. Here's one. There's something in New England we call the Environmental Business Council that we meet with regularly, the EPA, and it's basically consultants in companies, engineering companies, and entrepreneurs. And they're going to hold their first Environmental Business Council series on climate change, a 3-part series to discuss what is known about climate change, how it'll affect your world and your client's world, and what actions are needed to address climate change. And then finally, going back to the expo idea and the great stuff that's going on in Europe, and I really think it's a matter of leadership, frankly. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between we and European citizens. But anyhow, this is an announcement of an update on a Sustainable Connecticut Expo that's going to be happening this fall, and a little bit of information this is going to be sort of piggybacking on the New Haven Folk Festival. And this will be a 1-day event from noon to 7 o'clock, and lots of vendors and lots of partying and exhibits and that kind of stuff. So I'll pass that one along too. But I just basically wanted to share with you the optimism that sometimes we feel in government these days, and some ways in which you as individuals and people in your communities can participate in a lot of stuff that's going to make a contribution. And it's really it's not one thing or two things or three things. It's a whole broad front of folks and sectors that are working on this issue. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. What I was thinking of doing, rather than asking questions, so I could do that, or starting out with a question, would be to see if any of you have questions related to this perspectives from science, questions that you're thinking about that you'd like us to think with you about.
I have a question for Norm, if I could, to get things going. One of the things that's really interesting about this conference is the layers or levels at which we've had dialogue. It's been really interesting to hear perspectives. And I guess my question for you is, you've heard the same material. Your work is very actively involved with communities. Mm-hmm. And from my own work with communities, and Carolyn's perspective too is really interesting in this, is that you often have to communicate a very large, complicated message to an audience that is able to pick up on the subtleties of being talked down to, mm-hmm. but that need to have all the information in a way that they can understand it. And so I'm constantly going back and forth with the information that I'm receiving here and that problem, and I wondered if you could comment on that.
It's a daily problem for me, and I'm not trained as a communicator at all. I'm an environmental lawyer like Steve over there, except I've been doing the government side of things my whole career. I think it's a learned thing, it's a practice thing, it's an evolving thing. I think the point about personalizing is really critical. People want to know, how might this affect me or my family or my vacation plans or my purchasing? How are there ways that I can adjust my behavior in ways that respond to this really pretty frightening collection of science that's out there and that people are reading about and people are beginning to understand about the issue of climate change. I try not to scare people too much, but it's almost unavoidable. And then I offer them hope in the form of, this is scary stuff, folks, but there is going to be technology. Technology is not the only answer for sure, but that there are ways that we can respond to this in our daily living. And there's some element of faith and hope in that there's a lot going on at the state and local level, at the regional level, and at the municipal community kind of level. So it's a little bit of, you got to present the science and tell it how it is and what it might be and what the scientists are telling us. That's unavoidable and essential. But I think you also have to offer a message of hope and something practical, not just blind hope that we can take care of this one, folks. You have to tell them how we're going to take care of this. But you do have to acknowledge that there's more that we got to learn. There's a lot of hope and faith that are part of that too. There's a long answer, and it's a practice. It's not a perfection. Yes.
You ever, are you ever able to get people that you're speaking to who's on the personal? Or do you think that's impossible?
I'm sorry.
To get beyond the personal, like what's in it for me and my family in this moment. Are you ever able to appeal to them beyond that range?
To the more hard stuff? Is that?
No, like to the future generations.
Oh, absolutely.
To the other creatures with whom we share. Is that possible in that kind of
Oh, yeah,
conversation?
I think very much so it is.
Does it move?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it gets to the heart stuff. I mean, the scientific community and the government people are always in their heads. But I've learned a lot here in the last couple of days, and it's clear to me, and I knew it coming here, that a lot of it's in the heart, a lot of it's in the value stuff, it's in the way we grew up and the kinds of things that we remember from our childhood. So I think you can kind of tap into that, and I think it can help with people receiving a message that you want to give them.
Just even you just used the word personalizing before, personalizing the message, and I guess I've heard that in several different conversations, that this information has to be, consumer friendly. It has to be. Could you just maybe give an example of what you do when you personalize a message?
Well, I think I referred one of the earlier days here. The state of Connecticut, we funded to do a climate action plan. EPA funded to do a climate action plan, and one of the things that was done was a little kind of a picture book, a booklet of about 20 pages long. And I think I mentioned that it wasn't just graphs that, if you can read them and you can actually try to understand them, that are pretty scary and they're very scientific and all of that kind of thing. But also images of families at play, people in their offices and at work, people commuting or driving from place to place. And having images tell a lot of the story, and then the text portion gives them some flavor of the kinds of choices that they might be able to make. So that maybe that's a very concrete single state example, but it's something that we work on all the time, is try to come up with ways to make it personal.
Since Nancy's here from the Aldo Leopold Center, which is trying to communicate science, I wonder if we can involve you in this conversation.
Well, it is what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, so I don't want to take more than my fair share of time, but that is absolutely one of the fundamental questions that we really work on getting scientists to absorb is, you have to customize your message to whomever it is you're talking to, and to think what matters to that person, and to answer the question, so what? Because when you're talking to a journalist, the question always going across their mind is, so what? Why are you telling me this? And you would not believe how often that is not apparent. I think Michelle can testify to that. And you have to have an ability to cut to the chase, which is a very difficult thing for academics to do.
I think, Susie, you might describe now at some point the volume that's about to come out that you do based on a focus group around this very issue of climate work and delivery messaging. Or not.
I just want to correct that it's not around the focus group. It started, I was involved with one other colleague, Lisa Dilling, who's now at the University of Colorado in Boulder, bringing together a very diverse group of people who are in some ways experts, either academic experts or practitioner experts on any aspect of communication, with a number of people who are experts in any form of social change. From the individual behavior change to organizational change to what's going on in the communities and in states to people who think about social movements to people who think about how to change the political system. So, or educational system, whatever. And basically bring them together and learn from each other. What do we know about how to communicate effectively in order to achieve social change? Not just to scare people, out of their genius, whatever, but basically to be a constructive force as a communicator. And so that's resulting in a book that's coming out by the end of this year, early in 2007, called Creating a Climate for Change. It's very much focused on climate change, even though the expertise we draw often comes from, people who work on different types of social movements, or who, work on behavior change on other environmental issues not specific to climate per se, and just what do we learn from that. And I think the sort of the key, message from that is that there's so many sort of best practices that, we can always draw on in communication, but the key that we always have to deal with is how do you elevate the motivation to change, and at the same time, and that's the piece we always forget, how do you lower the resistance to changing what you do? Because people do things for a good reason, and you got to give them a really good reason and really good tools to help them overcome the barriers to change, the resistance to change. And so it's, that's sort of the overarching summary of the insights from across this entire spectrum. What Norm just mentioned, what you mentioned, the whole idea of motivating people on the basis of what they care about is key to that. It's not enough, but it's a key to that. And there is no single motivator, that will work for anyone. I mean, you will motivate some to take part in this on the basis of their identity, and that identity might be very different. Someone's identity as a mother or a father, and some as ecological residents of the universe, or they will be motivated by a law or by the threat of litigation, or they will be motivated by money, and. I mean, you have to find out what is it that motivates that particular audience, and help, weave that into your communication. But then at the same time, you think about, okay, what does this person face? When they go back home, when they go back to their business, what do they face in terms of obstacles to making the change? And that needs to be, addressed also.
I wonder about the other side, namely, when you get to talk about why this matters to you, and with whom do you talk about it, to what extent do you experience other people being really interested in why this would matter to you? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure.
Is that a question?
No, yeah, it's a question. I mean, because
Well, let me go.
you're not here unless you have some intense feelings, real strong sense of value, and you've had powerful experiences, whether they come from an abstract level or whether they come from family, wherever they come from, I don't know. But you've had experiences that.
Maybe these are shallow experiences and examples. I had done just 20 minutes at the computer this morning also, just sort of listing out, here's some images of, there are families that go skiing. There are people who like to ice skate or snowmobile or whatever. And what does it mean to them in their own lives? If suddenly that resource is limited or gone, and that affects people in terms of things that they really care about. Well, what if they go to the zoo and the variety just ain't there anymore? You can kind of spin out little stories. You're a fly fisher and you love to do that as a sport, or you're a commercial fisherman and you haul up your net and there's nothing in it, or the stream is suddenly too warm to sustain cold water trout that you love to fish for.
Yeah, I imagine you're talking about things that you can feel about. They may relate to other people, but these are things that you're able to really feel about, nonetheless. And I'm thinking about teachers that probably the best teacher I had in college was someone who had a very unusual view, very unusual approach to things, but things mattered to him enormously. That had a profound impact on me. Changed my life because it mattered to him and because there was some connection. You can't plan on that.
The church groups that I talk to, there are, a lot of what I hear, particularly this afternoon, that there's a real Buddhist element to what is being said and proposed here, in terms of continuum, temporal, and horizontal in many dimensions. It's the kind of thing that we can just sort of think through together. And I never thought I would say this, but I'm really drawn to that behind you, which is a flip chart, that I hope we're going to get to come out with some ideas for images and ways to communicate that I don't have, but and I don't want to do it now. I'll say that. But I keep hammering away on the practical stuff, and I'm not going to apologize for it because I got to go back and do this work. So, I want to hear from you too.
That's a question you have,
Yeah, and again, it's getting late in the day, but we do have to find the time for this, but this is a question I wanted to throw out there briefly, which is, what are some new images or ways of using language and metaphors, whatever, that people could take back from you and they can use if they want to use them in their everyday work.
And in their milieu. I mean, there are people around here who do all kinds of different work with their careers, and I only do one sort of thing. But you've got to speak the language, and you're all skillful, knowledgeable people, and you also want to have some concepts that you can take back to your work so that you can become better communicators.
I don't know how you're moving on that question that you just raised, Jeff, but I think it's been so much conversation, even in these many days. It might be nice to have just to kind of give that assignment to the group, to say, come back, let's all come back, go through notes, think through what you heard. What are the images that actually did move you? What are the things that could translate into action or translate into some effective things? I think my sense is we bypass a lot of things that could have been used, but they were just part of pretty vital conversation, and we didn't stop and say, now that's something we could use. So I don't know if others feel that way, but
It's a good idea. People should reflect on that, and we should come back and whoever's remembered something that appeared here or occurred here or has something that they'd like to share, we should do that.
I'm just wondering what happens to your gorilla. To your gorilla in the dream. I mean, I think that's another source of wisdom that we haven't really opened ourselves up to, the rich store of images that come to us when we are asleep. I wonder what the gorilla wants to say. He's trying to get into this conference.
Yeah.
You didn't invite
Why not?
I would love to raise a different question. So it's a change in topic. So
Go ahead.
is that okay?
Well, do you want to? Does anybody want to follow up on that question with the gorilla?
Yes.